Hello, and welcome to Hop at Home, a production of Dartmouth College. My name is Marcos Stafne. I'm the executive director of the Montshire Museum of Science and your moderator today to talk about an extremely interesting film called Another Round, which takes a look at a group of men who do a very informal scientific experiment to keep themselves at a level of drunkenness all day long for a period of time. And it's an interesting take on what happens if you do something like that, that it doesn't go well. With us today, we have two great folks to help discuss this film. Kyle Smith, the Associate Professor of this Center for Psychological and Brain Sciences, and Brian Bowden, the Student Wellness from the Student Wellness Center at Dartmouth College. Kyle, Brian, thank you so much for joining today to discuss this really interesting and provocative film, which is often deemed a serial comedy. But I think if anyone's ever lived with an alcoholic or has had experiences with alcoholism, it's not so funny. The film opens in a really interesting way, and I should say the film takes place in Denmark, so it's a very different experience than what might be perceived as a United States experience, with a number of students running around the lake, drinking and doing station-based drinks. I'm curious to know, like, your thoughts about sort of like mass consumption of alcohol and youth, and like how that moves forward in our culture.
Well, I'm happy to start off working with Dartmouth students and college students in general, where in the European countries, like Denmark, their drinking age is lower than in the US. And so they start drinking pretty much around their family in high school, and they can get some of that out of their system before they actually come to college, where our college students are arriving on campus where alcohol is still illegal for them to possess it, and drinking in secret, and it gets somewhat out of hand. And that competitive drinking that was exhibited at the very first of the film is exactly what happens on campus. Anytime they start to interact with and consuming alcohol, it gets into some type of competition. So it was definitely a real life experience to see that.
Yeah, I can just add my observations of the same sort, working at the college as well as having been in other colleges. That sort of seems to make a lot of sense. I know there's statistics out there you can certainly look up that at least in the United States, that what you saw at the beginning of the film and again at the end is a form of kind of binge drinking where you drink a whole bunch at once. I think it's like 5+ for males, if you like to have definitions from the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And that's, common and potentially problematic, obviously, for one's health and potentially for continued use down the road. And you can see in the movie how it's part of the culture, right? And I would say it's, as was mentioned, part of possibly, the culture of college in a lot of places for a lot of individuals as well.
All right. So the movie focuses on 4 high school teachers, or the equivalent high school teachers, who are sort of at a period of their age where I would say they start at a 40-year-old through maybe someone in his late 50s, who feel that they've sort of lost it and think that drinking will perhaps make them more, I guess, engaging or entertaining. Is this something that happens a lot with men in their, in this particular age period? Is it, they sort of lost it, so they turn to alcohol to make them more interesting?
I think anytime you get somewhat of a transition in ages that there can be a slight depression, and you don't use a depressive, like alcohol when you're depressed. And all these men seem to be somewhat slightly depressed to begin with, and it wouldn't be recommended that you use a depressant to treat that. But the way they go about it is somewhat entertaining.
Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm going to ask this, and maybe this is from a scientific perspective, like how they go about using a depressive, like within the first shots of the film, they end up, once they start drinking heavily, they start having a good time and they feel like they're having a good time. So what's that about in our brain?
Yeah, there's sort of two sides to that. Alcohol, I mean, it's classified as a depressant, but obviously anyone that's had some to drink knows that the initial phase as your blood alcohol level rises is energizing, right? And that's, the life of the party kind of idea. So it's energizing and, pro-social, you feel social, you feel energized, you feel a bit happier, stress and depression and stuff, boredom goes down. And then, as you overdo it or your blood alcohol level starts going down at the end of the night, it's definitely a depressant, clearly. And over time that aspect gets worse. So, in terms of what they do, it makes a bit of sense. Well, not the smartest sense, I guess, but sense in the objective way of thinking about it, where, they treat their stress and boredom and distress with alcohol, which is, available and part of like in their mind from the culture. It's at the restaurants they go to, and et cetera, et cetera. And mainly I would suspect they use it for that energizing effect, right? You see the Mads Mikkelsen, the actor, really killing it in his class, while he's trying to maintain a bit of blood alcohol level there. So you see the energy, and it's totally realistic for anyone that's been around or done that themselves. But the thing with all these drugs is you sort of use it to treat an issue, whether it's like mild or severe stress and depression. And yet, the more you do it, the more you actually exacerbate that issue, right? When you're not actually on it. And you can kind of see that play out a bit as the film goes on, and they have to sort of go back and deal with their real lives.
And it also may be in their perception as a person becomes more intoxicated, they feel a lot more relaxed, slight euphoria, decrease in anxiety, and they think they are the life of the party. But in reality, I think it's a little bit more realistic that next morning, as he's intoxicated and in the teacher's lounge, walking around and bumping into something, he still thinks he's somewhat the life of the party, even though he may be, immobile. So it's in their own perception that they think they are.
Yeah, there's
Right.
definitely a version of perception and cognition. Yeah.
And I do think that the movie, tries to go deeper than just issues of alcohol abuse or utilizing alcohol as a social lubricant. There's a lot in there about isolation and the male experience. And very explicitly, this is a movie about four white men experiencing middle age and feeling sort of this loss. Like, is there substance abuse patterns that happen? And we had mentioned this in transitions in life, but is this a common thing that happens where a few drinks turns into too many?
I can speak to that a little bit if you like, but yes, that is exactly how the problem starts, right? So there's, for whatever reason, some population of people are predisposed towards that, where they'll have a few drinks, and that's fine. Other people can maintain that. The whole point of the movie is to try to maintain this blood alcohol level, this magical 5%, at all times. But you can see, a lot of people can't really do that, and then there's some individuals that really, it just sort of starts them down a very slippery slope, and the science doesn't quite understand what makes those individuals vulnerable, but the fact of the matter is, if you do something that not only makes you feel better and also relieves boredom and stress and seems to apparently make your life better, the likelihood of you doing more of that is pretty high. And for some people, they're particularly at risk for really overdoing it. And you see that in the movie, that one individual kind of represents the reality of like the percentage of people that develop disorders out of those that drink regularly.
Yeah, I think in the U.S., NIAAA came out in, I think, 08, between 08 and 2010 with advertising that 0.05 is a BAC, that is where you get the most positive effects and not necessarily the negative effects. And we even attempted on our campus to, educate students, no more than, for men, no more than 2 drinks an hour, 4 drinks a day, so to speak. And for women, 1, 3, not every day. But once you start to drink that, if you're doing that every day, you're eventually going to build tolerance. And then you need a little bit more. And that's where, the movie kind of switched over into, hey, this is working pretty good. Let's up it a little bit. And I think in there somewhere, if I saw that they may have been using some stimulants as well, I couldn't quite tell, but that you can kind of start to drink in the evening and then do lots of caffeine during the day, and balancing out, and you're trying to get to a little bit better level. And when people in a transition time, such as college students going through transition or different phases of life, it's really not advisable to use all of these substances. Just take it easy, and you'll get through it, so to speak.
Yeah, the brain, I can tell you, is, and it's no surprise to anyone, a bit of a homeostatic thing. It likes to be stable, and when you push it really hard in one direction, it's going to rebound in the other direction, and that can occur over like the drinking and hangover cycle, or over longer periods of time, just as you're saying.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that the 4 men in the film chose to coalesce around drinking as their social activity. And I'm curious if there are more positive things that can come out in terms of like group behavior. I think there was a lot of social isolation that each of the men were feeling, and that like one man was a new father, so his entire life was spent with his children. One man was in a marriage that was not going great, and his kids were despondent. One person was living alone. Another person, they actually don't get into his like background life that much, but you could tell that all 4 of them were isolated. And I'm curious if either you can talk about isolation and sort of combating that, especially, I mean, in all experiences, but there are and is work about male isolation as you get older, and then things going south or negative because of that.
Yeah, the need for a connection. And I think, when college students are coming to campus, there's a need to connect. And as we're transitioning from one geographical region to another, or phases of life, we want to be able to connect. And all of these characters are definitely isolated. And it would have been advisable, so to speak, to, speak up, to talk, to connect with their significant others, or even their friends, and not necessarily consume so much alcohol. So that alcohol gives us an immediate connection. It's kind of like any other substance. If an individual smokes a cigarette, and somebody else smokes a cigarette, then, oh, hey, we have a connection. Or if you happen to like Jack Daniels, oh, we have a connection. So they can connect in other ways, just by talking, but obviously this makes it a little bit more entertaining.
Yeah,
there's something. Go ahead.
Yeah, whether it's social isolation or whatever, substances. Well, the reason people do them is they just give this immediate boost, whatever you call it. That, to be perfectly honest, is hard to replicate with what we might call more healthy or natural things like conversations and interactions of that nature. Those are obviously healthier than what you'll see in the movie, but the immediacy effect is powerful. It really is.
From a sociocultural perspective, I think the film shows a lot of cultural aspects of alcohol consumption within Denmark, right? So you see this sort of trial around the lake. You see we just saw a shot of people drinking at a graduation parade where it's open consumption on the streets. So what is it about our culture that influences alcohol? I think about this with smoking, and I can say I smoked for 12 years and have been off of smoking for 12 years at this point. But that said, like, there was just more smoking in our culture 12 years ago, 13 years ago, and that sort of dissipated. But there's very much alcohol in our culture, and like our visual culture, especially. How much does culture affect drinking, and I guess binge drinking or excessive drinking?
Well, it definitely affects an increase. The marketing campaigns of the different advertisers, or just being on any college campus, you are exposed to excessive use, and not just a little bit of use or moderation, but let's really overdo it. We're on spring break now or whatever holiday, and everybody wants to drink more and more. And I tend, when I'm working with students, they tend to want to shut off their brain. Let's turn off all these thoughts about what I coulda, shoulda, woulda be doing. And a way to do that is to consume alcohol. And the more you drink, the more your brain somewhat turns off. And there may be a little bit more productive ways to do that.
Yeah, I'd reiterate the same point. I think culture has a huge. I would say it's a mix of what's acceptable and culturally relevant, and also availability, and they sort of feed off of each other, of course. It's funny if anyone wants to look up old advertisements of now illegal drugs. They're really quite hilarious, and you can sort of see those echoing today in advertisements for e-cigs and stuff that are legal. But you see trends over time. Cocaine was really popular for some time. That has gone away. Cigarettes were popular. Now it's sort of replaced by e-cigs, and that's all cultural, and what's around you, and what's available, and what and what your friends are doing, and what's sort of focal points of culture, society. I mean that's can't get around that issue.
And on college campuses with the drinking culture. Obviously, hopefully, Dartmouth students are watching this. Pong is a big culture at Dartmouth, and they create competitions around Pong. And even in the summer, they have a tournament just around a drinking game. And it's this competitive drinking that kind of gets out of control. Any type of competitive drinking is somewhat of an abuse of alcohol. So, I mean, we wouldn't take anything else like iced tea and say, let's see who can drink the most iced tea. That's what happens with college students, in the way they kind of connect around something that they think is fun.
Well, I don't want to just pin college students on this, because the film does not, it shows this, but I think we all, there are things that we do to fool ourselves into thinking that we're doing something okay. And this is where I would bring in sort of the scientific method, where these 4 adult men, who are teachers, are like, well, let's do it as a science experiment. And let's think about this by keeping our blood alcohol level at X percent throughout the day. And they do like elaborate, using breathalyzers. They're doing, like, I'm watching this film and I'm like, this is citizen science in its own way. We could do this with like how many birds are flying in my yard, or how many, but in that, it's just trickery, right? It's tricking your brain into thinking like, well, I'm doing something that, like, I want to test something out. So how often do we do that? Do we just fool ourselves into thinking, is there something in our brain that just sort of like, there's a switch? Well, I'm doing it this way, so like I can back up my want to do this because it's a scientific thing, or it's a challenge, or it's a sport, or it's a game. I guess it's a system of rewards, right? Like you're getting reward in your brain to do something that's not very good for you.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think as anyone would recognize of themselves, for the most part, that people like seeking out new things and challenges, especially when it's a socially relevant. People are around you doing the same thing, and trying new things and testing things out in yourself. You're maybe a little smarter about it as you get older than you are as an adolescent, or maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it is to try to figure out your world and what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of that is based in reward or reinforcement, right? Learning what led to desirable outcomes and what led to undesirable outcomes, and adjusting your behavior based on that. And obviously the issue with substances is that they're powerfully reinforcing and rewarding. And so they sort of like you know, people always say they hijack your brain, but it's true in the sense that they are stronger as this reinforcing signal, you know, to do that again, that worked, you know, than really much of anything else in the natural world has to offer. And so that's part of the whole process. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, thinking that education is going to help reduce high-risk drinking alone, education alone has been proved to be a failure. It takes some environmental type of encounters as well. There are some studies out there on the use of breathalyzers on college campuses. So we had thought at one point, if we just give every student a breathalyzer, we educate them similar, exactly what they're talking about, don't go over 0.0506 BAC, then they would do that. That's your ideal prescribed, best way to get the best effects from alcohol. But what happened was that they immediately did what these individuals did, is they start competing to see who can get the highest BAC. Let's not just go to 0.06. Let's see how fast I can get to 1.5, or who can even get up above 0.2. So time and time again, science has shown us that people try to push the limit. Once it's a little bit good, then a little bit more might even be even better.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think this is where the film is troubling to me from a science perspective, where first of all, it takes just about one or two quick Googles to know that this theory of trying to do this over a prolonged period of time doesn't quite work out for people in the long run, right? Because, and I think the film quasi shows that, was saying it leads to addiction if you are trying to do this. Secondly, I was very perplexed about that they did not show or talk a little bit about the effects of the heightened blood alcohol levels. So when someone said, and they were very cavalierly, what's your BAC? And it's like, oh, it's 1.1, at one point. That's entering a dangerous territory, right? And then, as it starts to escalate more, there's no recompense for saying like, oh, actually, you could die like in this particular period, or do severe harm to others. And that's partially what makes me think of this as a sort of a weird film, and that is it a serial comedy? I don't know, because if you've ever experienced life with someone like that, what the gentlemen are doing is actually severely dangerous, especially towards the end. And it does end poorly for one of the men, because it leads to all sorts of, at a heightened blood alcohol level like that. And I don't know if either of you can speak to this. There are all sorts of other thoughts that creep into your mind, or cavalier thoughts, or suicidal ideation. Thoughts about that, gentlemen?
Sure, I can speak really quickly. I mean, yeah, once you reach first of all, the limit for driving and that sort of thing is reasonably low, but it's accurate, in terms of when you start getting impairments and reaction time and stuff. These people, and I'm sure we can speak a little bit about college binge drinking too. Just can go way beyond that, and then it's like all bets are off, right? You don't know what you're doing. You're not rational. You're not weighing any consequences. Your motor impairment is really severe, coordination and so forth, and your thinking is it can go negative and suicidal and depressive. It can go positive, like you can accomplish anything. And it's, we'll just say stupid at the end of the day, operating a boat like that individual did without a life jacket that he couldn't even get on because he was so drunk. It was fairly difficult and not a good situation.
Right. Yeah, anything over a 0.08, you can have impaired judgment, slurred speech, nausea, vomiting, loss of memory, blacking out, 0.12, 0.15. We set a goal at Dartmouth, to reduce any BAC above a 0.25, that's where people have actually died from an overdose of alcohol. And we were fairly successful in doing that with some environmental strategies. But Dartmouth students or college students, drink so much that they get impaired, come to the attention of others, and then we want to provide them some assistance. So it's not something to laugh off. What would happen is exactly what has happened in this film, where they would continue to escalate, where it causes relationship problems for those who do have relationships, and for those who don't have relationships, it can even cause accidental death or even intentional death.
Mm.
Yeah, it follows. I think there's two aspects, right? One is while you're drinking, there's the health issues there, and then the other is the long-term consequences of overdoing it over time, and both are bad at the end of the day.
Yeah, I do, and I will credit the film for never really over glamorizing what's going to happen to these men. It's sort of tonally, you do know that things aren't going to end well, and I likened this film a lot to Fight Club, in a way where violence between men was at issue there, and the film was a little bit more stylized and interesting and almost hypersexualized, to the point where it seemed an attractive experience. And I'm sure there were many fight clubs that spurned off of the movie. Whereas this, you see them doing the experiment and you just know it's not going to go well. And I think that does help to sort of put it in your heads that this is not something that maybe everybody should try for a long period of time. Thinking about this, is this a film that you think people would want to try doing this?
Yes, I mean, college students would see this and say, "Hey, let's try this experiment," and especially when the lead character, as a teacher, is talking about historical figures who did have a history of excessive alcohol use and were very successful. When you get into alcoholism or severe substance abuse, there's a whole system that supports them. Someone like Winston Churchill, I think it referred to here, of course, that's a very privileged individual that is supported in his position, that lots of enablers, but he was very, very successful. So we might even have some of those on college campuses or in real life, who have privilege and or money, success, and can use alcohol in a very abusive way. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a positive thing, but they can maintain it for a significant period of time.
Yeah, you can be functional, but don't fool yourself that you're damaging your body. You're damaging your liver, your stomach lining, your intestinal lining, et cetera, et cetera. Even if you can maintain functionality for these reasons or privileges, you're not doing your body any favors. I'd add that I think, to be perfectly honest, the movie, the point that they make early on of this weird philosopher, I don't know if that person actually exists or not, or if they made it up, but whatever, it doesn't matter. That there are benefits in terms of the social lubrication, the energizing effects, the less stress, less anxiety. You don't want to overlook that fact of the matter, and the reason people do drink to begin with is real. I think the movie does a good job of tracing how that can spiral out of control, and certain individuals can really have life destroying effects. I think I'll go back to a point that was made earlier about one thing that I think the movie overlooks is related to tolerance. And I think that's a really important aspect to this, which is if you're focused on about blood alcohol level, initially it might take one or a drink to get to 0.05 or something. But with time, your body adapts and your liver starts being better at metabolizing alcohol. Alcoholics have until their liver is damaged, an incredibly high level of ability to metabolize alcohol. So they need more to feel anything. And so if you want to maintain 0.05, well, over time, you're going to have to start drinking more and more, is the most likely situation there, if that's your focal point. And of course, then as you drink more and more, you're getting habitual, you're getting ritualistic. It's more pervasive in your life, and you can see them. They get in trouble because they find it at school or potential trouble, and so on. So the tolerance aspect is not trivial, and it makes you drink more to get whatever effect, whether it's feeling good or just maintaining a certain percentage of alcohol in your blood. and that escalation is really what defines the road towards problems, or defines the beginning of the road towards problems.
You know, we've been speaking about this as, you know, and often the conversation has drifted over to the college, but if we look at the area in which we live in New Hampshire and Vermont, I think about this, and I could just speak for myself. When I go to the doctor, I'm 43, the doctor, like within the first 1 minute, asks me like, okay, how many drinks do you have per day? How many per week? And sometimes the question is like, and I don't drink a suitcase of beer, but like I've asked, like, why are you asking me these questions? Because they'll say, well, you know, some people are like, do you drink a suitcase? And I had to say, what is a suitcase of beer? But that is that a lot of clientele for doctors are drinking at that level, which is like between 10 and 20 beers a day, which I think is pervasive in our area. So it's not just the college. I do think that there, you know, in the wilds of Vermont, New Hampshire, that there are issues at play as well. Have you found this in your research or your experiences here in rural areas where drinking, you know, is either, I mean, taken out of hand? We know we have this issue with opiates in both states. It's one of the primary issues with both governors. But drinking, sometimes I feel like it's underplayed in that realm because of the opiate addiction issue that we have.
Mm-hmm. And providers have been encouraged and are starting to do exactly what you said. Is every time you go to see a provider, they're going to be asking you, how much alcohol are you using? Are you using any nicotine products? Because these are definitely two of the things that are causing some significant damage health-wise before they even get into the conversation about them. Oh, I feel depressed. Well, don't drink so much. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me it's just this thing it's impossible to disentangle, which is we're rural, but it may also be a more culturally acceptable thing here, you know, because there's less transplants in rural areas. I mean, in terms of people, right? That maybe cultural norms get preserved over time. I'm from the Midwest initially, and you know, everyone jokes about, well, in Wisconsin or Minnesota or Michigan or whatever, there's nothing to do, so we drink a lot. And it's true that, you know, those areas do have higher rates of drinking. Whether or not it's because there's nothing to do, people can be a little more creative in terms of that.
I think that let's go back to excuses, because I'm from the South, and that's exactly what we would say. There's nothing to do, so we drink a lot or we smoke a lot. So it's. I wonder if it goes to an excuse, and I'm sure in the Southwest they say that too, and somewhere in the Northwest it happens too, right?
So we need to find a place that doesn't drink much and see how they've avoided all the rationalization.
Right. It's 5 o'clock somewhere in the world. You know, let's have a drink. And
right.
So
like that.
And we've kind of talked a lot of the science behind it, but it was actually a very good movie. I mean, it was very entertaining, great actors, and you know, I think it would be something for every age group to see. Educationally, I think it has the right message. In the end, it doesn't necessarily end well.
Yeah, I'd agree. I love movies. It's one of my passions, and I thought it was extremely well done. Just the acting and the storyline and the way the narrative was built and filmed. And it's funny. I've been following. I know that the main actor Mads Mikkelsen from his earlier work, and I'm literally right now watching the series Hannibal, which he's the Hannibal Lecter, and so that was a fun switch of mindset trying to set that aside while watching the movie. But you know, he did a great job in this one. Clearly, yeah, he's a wonderful actor.
Yeah, it's definitely a well acted film, and I've actually going to say like well directed, in that there is some really beautiful moments and intersplices of unique moments of reality. So we talked a little bit about leaders trying to preserve this sort of, or the community who works around particular leaders like Winston Churchill, who helps to keep them at a certain level, even though they are abusing alcohol. There's a wonderful scene where you just see like sort of drunk leader after drunk leader after drunk leader, and the way that it's framed is so telling, because when you see it all together in its individuality, you wouldn't really think that much of it, but seeing it together, you go, oh my gosh, like what happened that like someone could not just be drunk while working, but also be filmed, right, doing this, or addressing like the UN or addressing a huge corpus of people, and clearly being inebriated. So I think it does send messages that like time will tell that actually like that wasn't appropriate. We're at the end of our time here. Any final thoughts about the film or about this topic?
I would just say, again, it's a great film. I don't want to discount the theatrical production of it. Scientifically, it obviously leads to the end that I would say that most people would find of more and more depressive symptoms and potential fatalities. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I did too. I thought it was great, and I think it does a pretty totally accurate job of the consequences of this. And things work for a while for someone. They wind up dying. For the others, they got to like get control of their lives and basically reface the initial issues that they had dealt with. In some cases, they're even worse than they were before, right? And the end, I think, kind of captures that a bit symbolically. I'd add, the last thing I'd say is. With respect to a lot of what we've talked about is relevant to the current COVID pandemic situation where everyone's stuck at home, isolated and maybe bored and stressed. My understanding is that drinking has gone up as a consequence of that. I mean, there's debates about sales because what people are switching from restaurants to liquor stores, but I think the studies are pretty clear that drinking has gone up pretty much across the board in terms of age groups and stuff. And so just in terms of like the timeliness of this and just thinking about it, this movie is pretty spot on and maybe worth a visit just in terms of what we're going through now societally,
It does remind us that isolation doesn't happen just because of a pandemic, and that using substances isn't always about the pandemic. It's also life, right? We still have lives even within a pandemic. Well, Kyle, Brian, I just want to thank you so much for your expertise and your thoughts on this film. Again, I'm Marcos Stafne with Montshire Museum of Science, and this has been another production of Hop at Home. We do hope you enjoy another round. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you.
All right.